I never thought I'd say this, but I wish I had never started the beehive farm. It was supposed to be a simple, peaceful hobby that turned into a small business, a way to give back to my neighbors and make something sweet in the process. Now, I'm standing in my backyard, my beehives overturned, honeycombs shattered, and bees swarming in panic, all because of one woman with a clipboard and a grudge. And the worst part? She did it on purpose. Hey, just before we jump into the crazy details, do us a quick favor. Drop a comment below letting us know which city you're watching from. It might sound small, but it really boosts our channel and helps more people discover these stories. And while you're at it, smash that like button and subscribe to stay up to date on all the insane HOA, Karen, and Neighborhood Saga videos we've got coming. Her name is Karen Morrison, and she's the new head of the Homeowners Association. When she moved into the neighborhood, I didn't think much of it. She seemed friendly enough at first, baking cookies for neighbors, organizing community events, and promising to clean up the neighborhood. None of it concerned me. I was too busy tending to my bees and making sure my neighbors had the best honey they'd ever tasted. For years, everything had been fine. My beehive farm had become part of the community's identity. Families would stop by to buy jars of fresh honey, kids would grab honey sticks after school, and even local cafes featured my products. The bees thrived, and so did we. But Karen wasn't impressed. The trouble started with a letter. A polite but firm reminder that all businesses operating within the neighborhood needed to be registered with the HOA. I didn't think it applied to me. After all, this wasn't some major enterprise. It was a small backyard operation that everyone loved. Then came the inspections. Karen showed up unannounced, clipboard in hand, walking through my garden and inspecting the hives without permission. "I see you're running quite the operation here," she said, tapping her pen against her notes. "It's just a beehive farm," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I've been doing this for years, and no one's ever had a problem." She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Well, you're selling a product, and that makes it a business. As head of the HOA, I'm obligated to ensure you're paying the necessary fees." "Fees?" I asked, confused. "What fees?" "A production fee," she said, flipping through her papers. $500 a month should cover it." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her expression didn't change. "I'm serious," she said. "If you don't comply, we'll have to issue fines. And if those go unpaid, the HOA has the right to escalate matters further." I tried to reason with her. I gathered signatures from my neighbors, dozens of them, proving that no one had an issue with my beehive farm. But at the next HOA meeting, Karen dismissed the petition entirely, calling it irrelevant to the community's new standards. That's when I realized I needed legal advice. I contacted a lawyer, and after reviewing the situation, he confirmed what I had suspected. The fees Karen was demanding were completely illegal. According to state regulations governing homeowners associations, HOAs do not have the authority to impose arbitrary production fees on small home-based businesses, especially those classified as agricultural or hobby operations. My beehive farm, under current local zoning laws, was perfectly legal, and the HOA had no jurisdiction to shut it down or demand payments. "She can't do this," my lawyer assured me. "The law is on your side. If she tries to fine you, we can sue the HOA for overreach and damages." I held my ground, refusing to let her intimidate me. "If you don't back off, Karen, the next letter you get will be from the court." What happened next was so sudden, it took me a moment to realize what she had done. She lunged forward, shoving me hard enough that I stumbled back onto her porch. "You don't tell me what to do!" she screamed, her voice cracking. Her hand shot out toward my chest, pushing me again, but this time I caught her wrist. "Stop it!" I yelled, trying to push her away without hurting her, but Karen was in full meltdown mode. She grabbed the stack of legal papers from my hand and ripped them in half, scattering the pieces across her lawn. "You're finished!" she shrieked. "I'll make sure you regret ever moving here." Before I could respond, she stormed back inside, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the torn papers fluttering in the wind. My mind raced, wondering just how far she was willing to go. I didn't know it yet, but the worst was still to come. But what came next, I couldn't have predicted. The day after the meeting, I expected tension, but not the eerie escalation that followed. I awoke to the sound of bees buzzing frantically around my porch. At first, I thought something had disturbed the hives, but when I opened my front door, I froze. Someone had smeared sticky honey across the wood, dripping in thick trails down the sides of the door. The doorknob was slick with it, and whoever did it had left a message scrawled in the mess. "Sweet dreams, beekeeper." I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. I hadn't spilled anything. No, this was deliberate. I spent the morning cleaning the sticky residue, but the unsettling feeling gnawed at me. I checked the security cameras, but the footage was mysteriously corrupted. That night, I heard scratching noises outside my kitchen window. My heart pounded as I peeked through the blinds, half expecting to see Karen, but the yard was empty. The next morning, the real horror awaited me. Bags of sugar, 6 of them, had been ripped open and dumped across my front lawn. Ants swarmed the area in black waves, crawling up my shoes as I tried to assess the damage. The sweet, sickly scent clung to the air, a mockery of my honey production. I grabbed a rake, but it was no use. Thousands of ants had claimed the space. I called pest control, but even as they worked, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. When I answered, the line was silent for a moment, and then I heard it, the low hum of bees. My fingers tightened around the phone. The sound continued for 5 seconds before the call disconnected. I stood there, breathing hard, the weight of Karen's harassment sinking in. Still, I tried to stay calm. "She's just trying to scare you." But that night, things escalated. As I was getting ready for bed, a loud crash shattered the silence. I bolted to the window and saw water gushing across my yard. My garden hose had been slashed, and the pressure had sent it whipping like a snake. The flood soaked the flower beds and pooled around the base of my hives. I rushed outside, my breath fogging in the cold night air, and yanked the main valve shut. But as I inspected the damage, I saw something else, a small piece of paper pinned to the side of the hives, fluttering in the breeze. "Next time, the bees burn." I staggered backward, my mind racing. She wasn't just trying to inconvenience me. She wanted to destroy everything I had built. The next morning, the final blow hit. My prized flower beds, where my bees gathered their nectar, were shriveled and brown, the once vibrant blooms reduced to withered husks. The smell of weed killer was overwhelming, and when I knelt to touch the soil, it felt dry and poisoned. The bees hovered hesitantly nearby, as if they sensed the devastation. It wasn't just random vandalism. It was a message. She wanted me gone. I needed proof, and fast. So I installed security cameras around my property. If she wanted a war, I was going to be ready. For days, nothing happened, just the usual quiet hum of bees and the occasional knock of neighbors stopping by for honey. Then, on a Friday night, the cameras caught her. It started with a flicker of movement near the back gate. Karen, dressed in black, crept into my yard carrying a large container. My heart pounded as I watched her on the live feed. She made her way directly to the hives, unscrewed the lid of the container, and poured a thick chemical liquid over them. The bees reacted immediately, buzzing wildly as the liquid seeped into the hives. My stomach churned at the sight. She didn't stop there. Karen turned to my flower beds and dumped the remaining liquid onto the soil, ensuring that whatever she was using would kill everything it touched. I grabbed my phone, adrenaline coursing through me, and rushed outside. I didn't care if I confronted her in the act. This had to end. By the time I reached the yard, Karen was still there, her back turned as she admired her handiwork. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. She spun around, the container slipping from her hands and hitting the ground with a thud. For a moment, she looked genuinely startled, but it didn't last long. Her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms. "Just taking care of a community nuisance," she said with a smirk. "You should thank me. The neighborhood will be much better off." I could feel my blood boiling. "I've got you on camera," I said, holding up my phone. "Every second of this is recorded. You're done." Her smirk faltered. "You wouldn't—" "Oh, I would," I interrupted. "And the footage is already backed up. This isn't going away." Karen's face turned pale as she realized the weight of what I was saying. She took a step back, then another, before finally bolting toward the gate and disappearing into the night. The next morning, I reviewed the footage again, making sure it was all there, clear, undeniable proof. I called my lawyer immediately. "We have her," I said, barely able to contain my rage. With the evidence in hand, we filed an official police report and sent copies of the footage to the HOA board. The police report was filed. The HOA board had received the footage. Karen's smug smile was nowhere to be seen when she was served legal papers, but I knew better than to think she'd give up. I was right. It started with small things. A broken flower pot on my front porch, a garbage bag ripped open and scattered across my lawn, but it was nothing I could prove was her. My lawyer advised me to ignore it. "She's just trying to rattle you," he said. "We have the footage. She's on thin ice." But then came the night I realized she wasn't just trying to scare me, she wanted me out. It was just past midnight when my phone rang, the vibration buzzing against my nightstand. Groggy, I answered without checking the number. "Hello?" I mumbled. There was no response, just the faint sound of static followed by something worse, the low, unmistakable hum of bees. My heart jumped. I sat up, fully awake now, and the call disconnected. I stared at the phone in my hand, my pulse racing. Who would call me with that sound? My gut knew the answer before my brain could process it. Karen. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed to the window, peering out into the dark backyard. Nothing seemed off at first, but then I saw it. A faint flicker of movement near the beehives. I couldn't make out who it was, but someone was there. I didn't wait to think. I grabbed my phone and raced outside, the cold night air chilling my skin. My shoes crunched against the grass as I shined the flashlight toward the hives. Then I saw her. Karen, crouched near the hives, was holding a can of pesticide spray. The flashlight beam hit her square in the face, and she froze for a second, her eyes wide with shock before they narrowed into a glare. "You just can't leave me alone, can you?" she spat, standing up. "I should be asking you that," I shot back. "What the hell are you doing now?" Her lips curled into a grin that sent a chill down my spine. "I'm just finishing what you started," she said. "You think you've won because of that little video? Think again." Before I could respond, she dropped the can and pulled out a lighter from her pocket. My stomach dropped as I realized what she intended to do. "Don't you dare!" I lunged toward her, but she flicked the lighter on and tossed it toward the grass, where she had already poured some sort of accelerant. Flames erupted instantly, spreading toward the hives in a line of fire. The bees, disturbed by the smoke and heat, began to swarm. I grabbed the nearest garden hose and sprayed frantically at the fire, but Karen was already running toward the gate, laughing as she disappeared into the dark. I wasn't about to let her get away. Dropping the hose, I bolted after her, adrenaline pumping through my veins. My feet pounded against the pavement as I chased her down the street, my breath ragged. She glanced over her shoulder and tripped over the curb, falling hard onto the ground. I caught up to her, grabbing her arm just as she tried to get up. "Let go of me!" she screamed, thrashing against my grip. "Not until the police get here," I growled. By the time the police arrived, the fire had been contained, but the damage was done. One of my hives was destroyed. The honeycombs inside charred and melted. My bees buzzed frantically, their home ruined. Karen, disheveled and covered in dirt, was handcuffed and loaded into the back of a police car. As they drove away, she screamed from the back seat, "I'll make sure you regret this!" The courtroom was colder than I expected. The hum of the ceiling fan buzzed faintly above, but I barely noticed it. All I could hear was the tapping of Karen's manicured nails against the defense table, a nervous rhythm that betrayed her outward calm. She hadn't looked at me once since the trial began, but I could feel her presence like a storm waiting to strike. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s, stood confidently as she began her opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about one woman's obsession with control, an obsession that turned into harassment, destruction, and arson." She gestured toward the evidence table, where the charred remains of one of my beehives sat under protective glass. "What you'll see today is proof of an escalating campaign of terror that culminated in a dangerous act that could have caused even greater devastation." Karen shifted in her seat, her lawyer whispering something in her ear. I clenched my fists, the weight of everything pressing down on me, the destroyed beehives, the sleepless nights, the fear she had instilled. But today, I wasn't the one under pressure. Today, it was Karen's turn. The prosecutor wasted no time presenting the evidence. The video footage, The jury watched intently as the screen displayed the security footage I had captured the night of the attempted arson. Karen crouching near the hives, pouring accelerant and tossing the lighter, the flames igniting, her figure fleeing the scene. Karen's lawyer tried to object, claiming the footage was misinterpreted, but the judge dismissed it. The images spoke louder than any excuses. The phone records. The prosecutor presented the phone records showing a series of blocked calls to my number, all traced back to Karen's burner phone. One of those calls had played the eerie sound of buzzing bees, a psychological tactic meant to terrorize me. The jury shifted uncomfortably as the audio was played aloud. The pesticide can and lighter. The officers who arrested Karen testified that they had found the discarded pesticide can and lighter near the scene. Both had her fingerprints on them, sealing her connection to the act. Karen took the stand, her lawyer coaching her every step of the way. She started off strong, leaning into her carefully crafted persona, the concerned neighbor who only wanted to maintain community standards. "I never meant to hurt him," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I just wanted the neighborhood to be safe. He had dangerous bees swarming everywhere. I didn't know what to do." The prosecutor didn't flinch. "You didn't know what to do? Is that why you poured gasoline around his property and lit a fire?" Karen dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "It wasn't gasoline," she insisted. "It was just a weed killer. I panicked when I saw the bees coming at me." "And the lighter?" the prosecutor pressed. "Why did you have a lighter?" Karen hesitated, her breath catching for just a second. I carry it for self-defense. I never intended to set anything on fire." The jury didn't buy it. I could see it in their faces. When it was my turn to testify, I kept it simple. I described the escalating harassment, the poisoned plants, the vandalism, the creepy phone calls, and how it all led to the night she tried to destroy my beehives. "I wasn't just scared for my bees," I said, my voice steady. "I was scared for my life. She wasn't going to stop until I was gone." The prosecutor nodded. "And did you ever retaliate against her?" "No," I replied firmly. "I did everything by the book. I filed police reports. I collected evidence. But she kept coming." Karen's lawyer tried to discredit me, suggesting that I had provoked her by refusing to cooperate with the HOA's requests. But the jury didn't seem swayed. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The deliberation didn't take long. I sat in the courtroom, the tension like a weight on my chest. Karen stared straight ahead, her face pale, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. When the jury returned, I held my breath. The foreman stood. "We find the defendant, Karen Morrison, guilty of arson, harassment, and property damage." Relief washed over me. My shoulders sagged as the weight I had been carrying for months finally lifted. The judge ordered Karen to pay restitution for the damage she caused, including the destroyed beehives and legal fees. She was also sentenced to 6 months in jail, followed by probation, with mandatory counseling for anger management. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as she was led away in handcuffs, her once perfect facade shattered. As I left the courthouse, I was met by a few neighbors who had come to support me. "You did it," one of them said, clapping me on the back. "She's finally gone." The following week, Karen's house went on the market. The for sale sign in her front yard was like a victory flag waving in the wind. The neighborhood felt different, lighter, freer. But the real victory was in my backyard. My bees were buzzing again, their new hives thriving. As I stood among them, the soft hum filling the air, I realized that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about reclaiming what she had tried to take from me. Beekeepers don't just protect their hives. We rebuild, stronger than before.